Jackson Reynolds is trained to detect danger before it happens, but this time, his K-9 partner senses it first. In a sealed train deep beneath New York, a routine ride becomes a controlled kill zone, and a fragile passenger turns out to be the center of a covert extraction mission. With no backup, no signal, and enemies closing in, Jackson must do what he does best: eliminate the threat before it reaches her.
With a violent lurch of the train, pain screamed up Chloe's braced legs as she collapsed into the last available seat. She was sitting next to a man with a scarred face and an enormous German shepherd. Most service dogs paid her no mind, but this one was different. The dog's amber eyes focused on her with a startling intensity. It seemed ready to defend her from everyone and everything in the Friday night chaos of Penn Station. For Chloe Rollins, this entire situation was a nightmare. At only 24 years old, her life was defined by endless surgeries for a tethered spinal cord. The only things that kept her upright were heavy titanium crutches and leg braces. Each movement was a battle with gravity and pain, a battle she was losing today. The air in the station was a sickening mix of old pretzels, exhaust fumes, and the collective stress of 10,000 people rushing to get out of the city. All she cared about was getting on her 5:15 p.m. train to Boston. When they finally announced boarding, the crowd moved like a single wave, pushing Chloe aside as if she were not there. Nobody was intentionally cruel. They were simply not looking. In a city this large, a girl with a limp becomes just another obstacle. A businessman in an expensive suit bumped into her, sending a white-hot flash of agony up her spine. By the time she got on board, the train was packed. People used their fancy bags and coats to save the aisle seats, looking down at their phones to avoid making eye contact. Chloe struggled down the aisle, the clack and thump of her crutches echoing in the car. She could hear the quiet sighs of annoyance from other passengers. Her arms were shaking from the sheer effort. She knew that if she did not sit in the next 60 seconds, her legs were going to collapse. And then, at the very end of the car, she saw it, a single open aisle seat. As she drew nearer, she realized why it was empty. The man in the window seat looked like he was carved from rock, wearing a dark jacket and a black baseball cap pulled down low. A faint pink scar traveled from his ear down into the collar of his shirt. He was perfectly motionless with his eyes shut, but he seemed coiled and tense, like a powerful spring. That was not why people were keeping their distance, though. On the floor next to him was a 90-pound German shepherd. This was not a typical dog. It had on a sturdy harness with a patch that said, "Do not pet." It looked more like a military wolf than a simple animal. Chloe hesitated for a second. The train's horn blasted, signaling its departure. A tremor went through her weakened leg. She had to sit down. Gripping her crutches tightly, she moved forward. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice unsteady. The man's eyes flew open. They were a piercing, cold gray. He looked her up and down, noticing her exhausted face, her white-knuckled grip on her crutches, and the heavy braces on her legs. He did not smile or offer a greeting. "Is this seat free?" Chloe asked in a whisper. The man observed her for another long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. He offered no words. Instead, he used a small, silent hand gesture with the dog. The German shepherd repositioned itself with stunning quickness and silence. It pressed back against the man's legs, creating space for Chloe. "Thank you," she breathed, sinking into the seat with immense relief. She propped her crutches against the wall and shut her eyes as the train started to pull away. She concentrated on her breathing, wishing the ache in her back would fade. The man next to her stayed completely still. His name was Jackson Reynolds, and he was more than a veteran. He was a retired operator from the elite SEAL Team 6. Jackson had spent the last 14 years in the most hostile places in the world. He had survived firefights in mountains and rescued hostages from dense jungles. The dog at his feet, Havoc, was not there for emotional support. Havoc was a canine trained for multiple purposes. His skills included finding explosives, tracking hostiles, and attacking on command. He had parachuted from aircraft with Jackson and had saved his life more times than he could count. Havoc was conditioned to ignore everything that was not a direct threat. He ignored sounds, food, and other humans. That is precisely why the next thing that happened sent a cold dread through Jackson. The train gained speed, moving out of the dark tunnels and into the light of the afternoon. Chloe shifted her position, and an abrupt muscle cramp in her leg caused her brace to hit the seat with a clang. She inhaled sharply and bit her lip, trying to hide her pain. She hated ever appearing weak. On the floor, Havoc's ears perked up. Jackson was watching the dog from the corner of his eye. Havoc was trained to remain down, always. It was a command that was deeply ingrained in his mind, but for the very first time, Havoc disobeyed that command. The massive German shepherd rose to his feet slowly and without a sound. Jackson grew tense, his hand drifting toward the concealed Sig Sauer P-365 he carried at his waist. Havoc would only break an order if he detected a lethal threat, but the dog was not searching for a bomb or a concealed weapon. Instead, he focused all his attention on Chloe. She went completely still as the 90-pound creature started to move toward her lap. His jaws were strong enough to crush bone. She held her breath, too afraid to even flinch. Jackson opened his mouth to give a stern command, but the word died in his throat. Havoc was not snarling or showing his teeth. He was doing something Jackson had never witnessed in 6 years of active duty. The dog very gently placed his heavy chin on Chloe's trembling, braced leg. Chloe gasped quietly in surprise. Havoc let out a long, low sigh. He looked up at her with those serious amber eyes. Then he maneuvered himself into the space between her and the aisle, sitting tall like a sentry. He was forming a living barrier between this vulnerable woman and everyone else. He is guarding her, Jackson realized, completely shocked. "I am very sorry," Chloe whispered. Her hands hovered just above the dog's head, uncertain if she should touch him. "Is he all right?" Jackson finally turned to look at her, to truly see her. He noticed the deep exhaustion in her expression and the slight tremor in her hands. He glanced at Havoc, who was now scanning the aisle like a soldier on watch. "He is okay," Jackson said. His voice was deep and gravelly from years of shouting over the noise of helicopters. "It is just... he never does this." "Does what?" Chloe asked softly, at last letting her hand rest on the thick fur behind Havoc's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, which stunned Jackson even more. "He is a military service dog," Jackson explained in a low voice. "His training is for bombs and threats, not for providing comfort. He doesn't interact with civilians." Chloe looked down at the huge animal that was now using her leg as a pillow. So why was this highly trained dog behaving this way? Jackson's brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the car. 15 years of training in the world's most dangerous environments kicked into high gear. Havoc was not just being friendly. Dogs like him can perceive chemical changes in people. They can smell fear, adrenaline, and malevolent intent. The dog recognized that Chloe was in a fragile state. More than that, Havoc had positioned himself as a guard, blocking her from the aisle. He was protecting her. Jackson's keen eyes moved over the passengers up ahead. An older couple was asleep in row 12. In row 13, a college student with headphones typed furiously on a laptop. A mother in row 14 was keeping her toddler busy with an iPad. Then his gaze stopped on row 15, on a man dressed in an expensive navy blue suit. Jackson's focus locked onto this man. His name was Simon Miller, though Jackson had no way of knowing that. Simon looked perfectly ordinary. He had well-kept brown hair, pricey glasses, and a leather briefcase in his lap. To any other person, he was just a businessman on his way home. But Jackson was not any other person. He noticed the small, odd details right away. Simon was in an aisle seat but was turned at a strange angle. He was holding a magazine but had not turned a single page in the last 10 minutes. Most tellingly, he was using the reflection in the dark train window like a mirror. He was not looking at the scenery outside. He was watching the inside of the car. To be exact, he was watching the reflection of the very last row. He was watching Chloe. Jackson could see Simon's eyes tracking Chloe's image in the glass. The man's jaw was clenched. He put a hand inside his suit jacket, let it rest for a moment, and then took it out. It could be a nervous tic, a way to calm himself, or he could be checking on a weapon. All at once, Havoc made a sound. It was not a bark. It was a deep, quiet growl that seemed to make the floor vibrate. It was a sound Jackson recognized immediately. It was the noise Havoc made right before they would storm a building filled with enemies. "What is the matter with him?" Chloe whispered, pulling her hand back as she felt the dog's muscles tighten beneath her fingers. "Nothing," Jackson answered, his voice dropping to a dangerously low tone. "He is just doing what he was trained to do. Please, keep your hands on your lap, and do not make any quick movements." The entire atmosphere in the train car changed from dull to charged. A palpable tension filled the air, and it tasted like iron. Jackson Reynolds sat perfectly still, his hands on his lap, appearing calm but ready to spring into action in a split second. Chloe was filled with a sense of dread, though she did not understand why. The man with the scars next to her had not been a threat at all. In fact, he was the only person who had been kind enough to let her sit down. His dog, for all its intimidating appearance, now felt like a warm, protective weight on her aching leg. Despite this, the air around her felt heavy and threatening. "What is your name?" Jackson asked in a quiet voice, his eyes never leaving the man in the blue suit 3 rows ahead. "Chloe," she replied, her own voice shaky. "Chloe Rollins." "Jackson," he said, keeping it simple. "Listen carefully, Chloe. I do not want to scare you, but I have to ask you a question. Did you see anyone following you earlier today? Maybe at the station?" Chloe's heart began to race. She tried to forget the awful trip through Penn Station. She was in so much pain, she could only think about placing one crutch in front of the other without falling. She never made eye contact with anyone, staring only at the ground. "No," she whispered, and her voice trembled with fear. "No, I am coming from my doctor in Manhattan. I am trying to get home to Boston. What is going on?" "Do not look up," Jackson said. His voice was soft but firm. "Keep your eyes on the dog. Pet him if you need to stay calm." Chloe obeyed, burying her shaking hand in Havoc's thick fur. The dog's deep growl was a constant warning aimed down the aisle. Simon Miller stood up. He straightened his suit jacket, picked up his leather briefcase, and stepped into the aisle. He did not go toward the front of the train where the cafe car was. Instead, he turned and started walking slowly toward the back, right where Jackson and Chloe were sitting. Jackson noted every small detail of the man's movements. Simon's walk looked a little strange. He was trying to act relaxed, but his posture was stiff. His right hand squeezed the briefcase handle until his knuckles were white. His left hand, however, swung freely, just a little too close to his jacket pocket. Simon finally stopped right next to their row. He looked down at them. Chloe felt his shadow fall over her, and she could not help but glance up. Simon had a nice, even face, but his eyes were completely blank. They had no normal human warmth or emotion. They were like the dark lenses of a camera, just collecting information. "Are you having some trouble with those crutches?" Simon asked. His voice was polished and smooth, but it lacked any real kindness. It was a practiced opening line. Before Chloe could even think of an answer, Havoc leaped into action. The dog made no sound. A bark is a warning. Havoc was done with warnings. The giant German shepherd jumped forward, throwing his 90-pound body over Chloe's lap, and snapped his jaws with a loud crack just 3 inches from Simon Miller's leg. Simon stumbled backward in shock, bumping into the armrest on the other side of the aisle. His friendly look disappeared, replaced by pure, murderous anger. "My goodness!" Simon yelled, pretending to be a shocked passenger. "Get control of your dog! It just tried to bite me." Jackson did not raise his voice. He did not even stand up. He just looked at Simon with eyes that had seen death before. "He did not try to bite you," Jackson said, his voice cutting through the noise of the train. "If he had tried, your main artery would be painting the ceiling. He was telling you to move away." "That animal's dangerous," Simon hissed, and he took another step closer, his hand moving toward his jacket. "I am going to get the conductor." "Take another step," Jackson said, his voice chillingly calm. "Put your hand inside that left pocket. I dare you. Give me a reason." Simon froze. For 3 long seconds, the 2 men locked eyes. Jackson had not moved an inch, but you could feel the dangerous energy coming from him. Simon was a predator, used to hunting the weak. He chose the girl with crutches because she looked like an easy mark. He saw that she was hurt by herself and struggling, but he had made a huge mistake. He did not know the quiet man with her was different. He had wandered into the territory of a far more serious threat. Simon looked down at Jackson's waist and saw the faint outline of an object under his jacket. He glanced at Havoc, who was now showing all of his sharp, clean white teeth. Simon slowly raised his hands as if he was giving up, a fake, ugly smile on his face. "Take it easy, friend. I was just trying to be friendly." He spun around and walked quickly toward the front of the train, disappearing through the sliding doors into the next car. Chloe was finding it hard to breathe, her chest heaving up and down. Who was that? Why did he—" "Just take a breath, Chloe," Jackson said, finally turning his gaze from the doors. He reached down and gave Havoc a reassuring pat. "Stand down, buddy. Good boy." Havoc immediately stopped his growling, but he stayed pressed against Chloe's legs, still on duty. "I do not know who he is," Jackson said quietly, his mind working fast. But he was not looking for the restroom, and he did not want to make friends. Before Chloe could say more, the train car was thrown into complete darkness. The steady click of the wheels turned into a terrible, loud scream of metal on metal. Someone had pulled the emergency brakes. The massive Acela Express train shuddered violently, which threw luggage from the overhead racks and sent screaming passengers into the seats in front of them. Jackson moved with unbelievable speed. He unbuckled his seatbelt, threw himself sideways, and pressed Chloe into her seat, using his body as a shield for her head and neck. Below them, Havoc dropped to the floor, covering Chloe's legs with his heavy body. The train slammed to a final, brutal stop inside a dark tunnel. The backup emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the car in a strange, pale yellow light. Smoke and dust clouded the air. Outside the window, there was nothing but the dark, damp brick of the tunnel wall. "Are you hurt?" Jackson whispered, his face very close to hers. "No," she gasped, her body shaking wildly. Jackson slowly pulled back, his eyes quickly scanning the chaos and panic. The glass doors at the front of the car had shattered from the sudden stop. Jackson's voice was quiet but serious. He said, "You stay right here." His hand went under his jacket and found the grip of his pistol. "Do not move from this seat. Havoc, guard." The dog let out a small whine of understanding and moved even closer to Chloe. She panicked and grabbed Jackson's arm, asking him where he was going. Jackson just stared at the broken doors. He said in a low voice, "Trains do not just hit the brakes inside a tunnel. Someone caused this, and I think it was the man in the blue suit." The air was thick with dust and the bitter, chemical smell of hot brakes. Emergency lights gave off a sickly, yellow glow, on the terrified passengers. People were crying and coughing from the dust. They reached for their cell phones, only to discover what Jackson already knew. They were deep in a tunnel under the East River. There was absolutely no phone signal. They were trapped in a long metal tube. Jackson moved down the aisle with the silent skill of a hunter. His training had prepared him to work in the middle of chaos, to tune out the screams and focus on the real danger. He drew his Sig Sauer P5 from its holster, holding it close to his body, hidden by his jacket. He stepped carefully over a shattered laptop and moved around a businessman who was breathing too fast on the floor. When he reached the broken doors of their car, he found the train conductor. His name tag read Stanley Jenkins. The older man was slumped on the floor, holding a bloody gash on his forehead. "Hey," Jackson said softly, kneeling down and placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "What just happened?" "Who hit the brakes?" Stanley blinked, his eyes blurry with blood. "A man in a blue suit shoved me. Another guy was waiting here for him, a really big man, in a leather jacket. They forced open the emergency panel and pulled the lever. Then they sealed the doors to the cars ahead of us." Jackson's mind put the pieces together. 2 men. By locking the forward doors, they were not trying to take over the train. They were isolating the back cars. They were building a trap, a hunting ground. They asked about security cameras. Stanley coughed, wincing in pain. They wanted to know if this tunnel had cameras. I told them no, and then they struck me. Jackson's jaw tightened. This was not a random act of violence. It was a carefully planned ambush, happening where there were no witnesses. He gave Stanley's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Stay put. Do not try to be a hero." Then, Jackson slipped into the dark space between the train cars. The loud drone of the tunnel's ventilation system hid the sound of his footsteps. He peered through the scratched plastic window of the next car. He saw them. Simon Miller had removed his expensive suit jacket. He now wore a black tactical shirt. He was standing at the far end of the car, guarding the locked door. But it was the other man, the one Stanley mentioned, that made the hair on Jackson's neck stand up. The man was as big as a refrigerator and wore a heavy leather jacket and tactical gloves. His name was Roman Blackwood, a notorious specialist who handled messy jobs with extreme force. Roman was not just robbing passengers. He was moving slowly down the aisle, looking closely at every single person's legs. Legs. Jackson's thoughts immediately jumped to Chloe. He remembered her carbon fiber leg braces and her special set of crutches. She had mentioned coming from a medical appointment in the city. In that instant, everything clicked into place with a terrible certainty. They were not targeting Chloe for who she was. They were targeting her for something she was carrying without even knowing it. She was being used. The clinic she had visited must have hidden something incredibly valuable and illegal inside of her medical gear, and Simon and Roman were here to collect it. Roman pushed a frightened teenager aside and began to walk toward Chloe's car, assuming the girl on crutches would be no trouble at all. There was no time for a strategy. Jackson disappeared into the dark passage between cars. He became one with the shadows, his breath silent. A heavy door groaned open. Roman entered, his eyes straining in the poor light, completely unaware of the threat. The attack was sudden and vicious. Jackson avoided his firearm. A shot would have been deafening in the tunnel, alerting Simon. He instead drove his forearm into Roman's neck, pinning the big man to the steel wall. His right knee came up sharply, striking a nerve and deadening Roman's leg. Roman gasped for air as his leg collapsed beneath him. He was a seasoned brawler, though. Struggling to breathe, he threw a powerful elbow toward Jackson's face. Jackson leaned back, the blow missing by a fraction. He seized Roman's arm, wrenching it backward at an unnatural angle. A sickening tear of tissue echoed in the narrow space. The big man crumpled, his face turning a deep purple. Jackson moved close, his whisper sharp as ice. "Tell me about the equipment." What did the doctor put in her braces? Roman coughed up blood and gasped, "You are finished. The drive. A prototype. It is in the titanium housing." Jackson increased the pressure on the man's mangled shoulder, drawing a groan of pain. "Who is Simon's boss?" Roman never got to answer. A distinct click came from the other side of the passage. Jackson recognized it instantly. A 9mm handgun was ready to shoot. Through the glass, Simon was taking aim. Without hesitation, Jackson shoved Roman's large frame forward. He crashed into the door at the exact moment Simon shot. The explosion was deafening. A powerful blast that blew the window to pieces. The round hit Roman's armored vest, dropping him in a heap on the floor. Jackson was already retreating, finding cover inside Chloe's train car. This was far from over. For Chloe, the world had become a terrifying chaos. The gunshot triggered fresh panic on the train. Passengers scrambled for cover, hiding under their seats. But Chloe was completely exposed. Her rigid braces and aching back kept her from moving quickly or hiding. She was a helpless target, but she had a guardian. Havoc was all muscle and instinct. The gunshot instantly triggered his training. The big shepherd did not flinch or run. He positioned himself over Chloe's legs, forming a protective barrier. A deep, menacing growl started in his chest, a vibration Chloe felt in her own bones. "Good boy," she whispered, her hands trembling as she grabbed his fur. "Please do not leave me." Then another figure emerged from the hazy aisle. It was not Jackson. It was someone else. He had been a few rows ahead all along, disguised as just another passenger. A gray sweatshirt and a face mask concealed his identity. This was Trevor, the man Simon's team sent to handle problems. The gunshot was his signal that the plan had failed. His mission was now to retrieve the asset. Trevor moved down the aisle, ignoring the panicked crowd. His gaze locked onto Chloe. From his pocket, he produced a heavy, pointed metal bar. He needed to pry open her titanium braces, grab the drive, and vanish. "Apologies, little one," Trevor murmured, closing in. "This will be unpleasant." He raised the bar to smash down on her knee. The blow never landed. Havoc launched himself through the air. He was a blur of motion. The dog bypassed the weapon and locked his powerful jaws onto Trevor's right arm. A loud crack of bone echoed through the car, followed by Trevor's agonized shriek. The metal bar clattered on the ground, but Havoc's attack continued. Havoc knew how to neutralize an enemy. He used his momentum to spin and drag Trevor down into the narrow space. The big dog pinned the screaming man to the ground. His massive paws were on Trevor's chest, his teeth still gripping the broken arm. He was not mauling, just restraining. The dog's intelligent eyes locked with Trevor's, a low growl serving as a clear warning. Chloe watched, her heart hammering. The gentle creature from moments ago had become a lethal protector. A shadow fell over her, and Jackson appeared. His gaze took in the entire scene in a second. The tool, the man pinned by the dog, and Chloe, pale but unharmed. "Havoc! Release!" Jackson ordered sharply. The dog obeyed at once. He backed away but remained on alert, watching the whimpering man. Jackson ignored Trevor's pain. He pulled 2 plastic zip ties from his belt and fastened the man's good arm to a seat post. Jackson turned his full attention to Chloe, kneeling down to her level. "Chloe, listen to me," he said, his voice becoming gentle. "Are you hurt? Did that man touch you?" "No," she managed, tears starting to fall. "Havoc. The dog protected me." "Good boy," Jackson murmured, briefly stroking the shepherd's head. Havoc gave a single thump of his tail. Jackson's focus shifted to her legs, to the complex braces of carbon fiber and metal. "Chloe, I need your help," he said, his serious eyes locking with hers. "Think back to the clinic in Manhattan. Did they work on your braces in a separate room? Make any changes?" Chloe looked confused by the odd question. "Yes," Dr. Aries said a recalibration was needed. He had them in his lab for nearly an hour. Jackson swore under his breath. He ran his fingers over the thickest section of her left brace. He felt a tiny, almost invisible seam. The metal was not solid. It was a shell. It is a secret compartment. Chloe, they have used you, Jackson said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Your doctor is involved in something illegal. He turned your braces into a smuggling device. It is likely secret information, stolen from the government or a company. These men want what is hidden inside your brace. Chloe stared at her legs in disbelief and horror. The equipment that helped her stand was now a weapon against her. Can you remove it? She whispered, her voice shaking. Let them have it. I cannot, Jackson replied firmly. They would eliminate us as witnesses. We do not surrender. We get through this. At that moment, the damaged door at the front of the car was yanked open with a crash. Jackson stood up. A man he knew as Simon Miller entered the car, a 9mm handgun sweeping the aisle. The passenger disguise was gone. He looked like a trapped predator, racing to grab his loot before authorities arrived. Havoc, Jackson whispered, his tone turning hard as steel. Engage. The shepherd moved past Chloe into the center aisle, his hackles raised. Jackson took position directly behind his dog, his own weapon aimed at Simon. It is over, Miller. Walk away. Jackson's command cut through the tense silence of the car. Simon laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You are a long way from home, soldier boy. You think you and your pet can keep me from my property? Jackson's gaze intensified. He is more than a pet, and I am not a soldier. His finger rested on the trigger. I am a Navy SEAL. Beads of sweat formed on Simon Miller's brow, glistening under the emergency lighting. He was an expert in corporate espionage, not a combatant prepared for an elite warrior and his trained canine partner. The narrow train aisle had become a kill zone, with Jackson in control. What are you, some kind of hero? Simon sneered, though his weapon wavered. You have no idea what you are protecting. It is a stolen defense program. My employers will tear this town apart for it. You are dying for a crippled girl you do not even know. I do not need to know her, Jackson replied. His calm tone was more frightening than any shout. I just need to know you. Simon's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. He was outmatched in a straight shootout. Jackson's aim would be flawless. Jackson aimed his pistol squarely at Simon's chest. If Simon made a single move to shoot, Jackson could fire twice into his heart before Simon's mind could even process it. Desperation often leads to terrible decisions. Simon suddenly dove to his right. He seized a terrified woman cowering in her seat, a nurse named Sophia Higgins. With a brutal tug, Simon dragged Sophia to her feet and shoved his 9mm pistol against her head, using her as a human shield. Sophia screamed in pure horror, her hands flying to her face. Put your weapon down, Simon shouted, his composure shattering into the raw panic of a cornered animal. Drop it right now, or she dies. A ripple of horror spread through the other passengers. Chloe clamped her hands over her mouth, sobbing for the innocent woman trapped in this nightmare. Jackson's expression remained like stone. He did not lower his weapon. In a hostage situation, giving up your gun means losing any chance of control. Instead, his eyes flicked up to the ceiling of the train car, calculating angles and light. Then, Jackson did something completely unexpected. He removed his left hand from his pistol and reached into a large pocket on his trousers. I said, "Drop it!" Simon screamed, pressing the gun even harder against Sophia's temple. I am complying with your demand, Jackson said in a steady voice. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed a small, dark object down the aisle. It landed softly on the carpeted floor and rolled to a stop about 3 feet away from Simon. Simon glanced down, and his face went pale with terror. He thought it was a grenade, but it was not a grenade. It was a tactical flashlight, equipped with a very strong strobe function. The moment it stopped moving, Jackson triggered a remote switch in his pocket. The flashlight erupted with 3,000 lumens of blinding, pulsating light, aimed directly at Simon's face. In the dim train car, the sudden burst was utterly disorienting, destroying Simon's night vision and forcing him to recoil. Simon squeezed his eyes shut and jerked his head away from the piercing light. That single moment of distraction lasted just 1.5 seconds, but for a Navy SEAL and his canine partner, that was more than enough time. Jackson did not fire his gun because the danger to Sophia was too high. Instead, he made a low, sharp clicking sound with his tongue. Havoc did not charge straight down the aisle, which would have presented a clear target. The 90-pound German Shepherd leaped over the seats, using them like hurdles. He moved like a silent shadow through the flashing chaos, flanking the blinded gunman. Before Simon could blink the spots from his eyes, Havoc launched himself from the back of a seat. The dog slammed into Simon from the side with astonishing force. Havoc expertly avoided the hostage, his powerful jaw clamping down on Simon's gun arm right at the elbow. The sheer momentum of the dog's attack sent Simon flying away from Sophia. Simon let out a guttural scream of agony as the bones in his arms snapped. The 9mm pistol clattered uselessly to the floor. Havoc drove Simon to the ground, pinning the man's chest with his weight and unleashing a deep, menacing snarl inches from his face. Sophia collapsed into the aisle, sobbing hysterically. Jackson crossed the space between them in 3 swift strides. He kicked Simon's handgun far under his seat, then hauled the man up by his shirt collar. A single, powerful knee to the chest knocked the remaining air from Simon's lungs. "Havoc! Off!" Jackson commanded. The dog instantly released the mangled arm and stepped back, his intelligent eyes never leaving the man's throat. Jackson produced another set of heavy-duty zip ties, expertly binding Simon's hands behind his back. The assault was over. The train car was now secure. A hush fell over the car, broken only by the quiet weeping of passengers and the deep, even breathing of the German Shepherd. Jackson finally rose to his feet, his own breath coming just a little faster. He looked down at Simon, who was gasping on the floor, his face a mask of white terror. "Aegis defense systems should really screen their employees better," Jackson said coldly. He turned and walked back down the aisle as the disorienting strobe light shut off. He knelt beside Chloe once more. She was shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "It's over," Jackson said softly, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are safe now, Chloe. Nobody is going to hurt you." The surge of adrenaline drained from Chloe's system, replaced by a profound exhaustion and the awful realization of her own vulnerability. She looked down at the brace that supported her left leg. She had depended on that sturdy frame of titanium and carbon fiber for years just to be able to walk. Dr. Eris, a man she had trusted without question for 5 years, had secretly hollowed it out. He had turned her into a mule for stolen government property. "He was always so kind to me," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Dr. Eris." He would smile and say he was reinforcing the hinges to help with my pain. He even brought me a coffee while I waited for the adjustments. Jackson's jaw tightened. He had seen the worst of humanity in war zones across the globe. But a doctor who would exploit a patient with a disability was a special kind of evil. "People who trade in secrets eventually stop seeing people," Jackson explained gently. "All they see are assets and delivery methods." He pulled a specialized multi-tool from a pouch on his vest. "I need to get that drive out of your brace before the authorities arrive. If the Federal Bureau of Investigation finds it on your person, you will be detained for weeks while they try to prove you were involved. We must separate you from this evidence." Chloe nodded urgently. "Please, just get it off of me." Jackson kneeled on the floor. Havoc padded over and laid his heavy head on Chloe's uninjured knee. The comforting weight helped to steady her nerves. Jackson carefully examined the thick titanium bar along the side of her brace. He used a small light on his tool to locate a nearly invisible seam. The work was masterful. The bar looked like one solid piece of metal, but a minuscule screw was concealed beneath a thin layer of rubber. With precise movements, Jackson peeled back the rubber and fitted the tiny screwdriver into the slot. He gave it 3 complete turns. A small, 3-inch panel on the metal bar popped open with a faint click. Tucked inside the hidden cavity, nestled in soft foam, was a sleek black memory stick. It had no brand name, only a laser-engraved serial number and a small, faded red symbol that Jackson recognized immediately. It was a classified insignia from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Jackson used the tip of his knife to gently pry the drive from its compartment. He held it up, looking at the small device that had almost cost Chloe her life. "This thing has military-grade encryption," Jackson murmured. He wrapped the drive in a small piece of cloth and tucked it into a secure pocket of his vest. "I will hand this over to the federal agents personally when they get here. I'll make it clear you were an unwilling pawn. Your name will not appear as a suspect in any report. You have my word." "Thank you," Chloe choked out, finally allowing herself to sag against the seat in relief. "I can't imagine how I could ever repay you. You and Havoc." "He's a good boy," Jackson said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "He knew you were someone worth protecting." At that moment, the screech of power tools cutting through metal echoed from the front of the train. Every passenger fell silent. Flashing red and blue lights began to dance across the grimy tunnel walls outside. "That will be the New York Police Department Emergency Service Unit," Jackson announced, his voice carrying through the car. "Listen to me, everyone. The police are about to enter. Please keep your hands visible. Do not make any sudden moves. We have 3 assailants secured on the floor. Let the police take it from this point." A brilliant spotlight suddenly flooded the front of the car, making it difficult to see. Police in tactical blue gear burst into the train car, their rifles ready. "New York Police! Hands in the air! Do not move!" the officer in charge shouted, his flashlight cutting through the space. Jackson remained perfectly still. He understood the chaos of a police raid. He rose slowly, his empty hands held open near his shoulders. He positioned himself slightly in front of Havoc, shielding the dog from any jumpy officers. "Friendly," Jackson called out in a clear voice police would recognize. "I am retired Navy Special Forces. My weapon is holstered. I have 1 hostile down and 2 more in the aisle. The threat is neutralized." The team leader advanced cautiously. He kept his weapon aimed at Jackson's chest as his squad secured Simon, Trevor, and Roman. "Keep your hands where I can see them, sir," the officer commanded. His gaze flickered to the big German shepherd sitting calmly beside Jackson. "Get control of your dog. He is a military police canine. He will not act without my order," Jackson stated calmly. The suspects used the emergency brake. They were after classified intelligence. As officers swarmed the train to secure the criminals and aid passengers, a medic rushed to Chloe. "Miss, are you injured?" the paramedic inquired, checking her pupils with a penlight. "I am fine," Chloe replied, her voice shaky but strong. "It is my back. I cannot stand for extended periods." "We are bringing a special board to move you," the medic assured her, speaking into his radio for help. While they prepared to transport her, Chloe looked up. Jackson was surrounded by police, calmly presenting his identification and handing a small drive to a newly arrived federal agent. Amid the noise and confusion, knowing hours of questions awaited him, Jackson turned his head. His intense gray eyes found hers from across the car. He gave her a single, respectful nod. Beside him, Havoc was poised and alert. The stunning German shepherd exhaled slowly, his amber eyes meeting Chloe's one last time. Then Jackson gave the command, and the dog vanished with him into the flashing lights. Inside the interrogation room, the bright lights of the Federal Bureau of Investigation office made a constant, buzzing sound. Chloe clutched a coarse gray blanket, a cup of cold coffee untouched on the metal table. It was 9 hours after the train was stormed. 9 hours of medics, police strobes, questions, and this endless interview with two exhausted federal agents. A man with a permanently tired face, Special Agent Thomas Sterling, dropped a thick file onto the table. "Miss Rollins, you must grasp the severity of this," he urged, leaning forward. "The device from your leg brace contains a new quantum targeting system. It was built by Aegis Defense Systems for a top-secret government project. The men on that train were highly trained corporate mercenaries. They don't just attack random women unless that woman knows exactly what she's carrying." "I have told you everything," Chloe insisted, her voice frail but firm with a strength she didn't know she had. "I visited my doctor, George Aris, for a routine adjustment on my brace. He took it into his workshop. I drank a cup of tea in his waiting room. I had no idea about any of this." Agent Sterling rubbed the side of his weary head. "Dr. Aris is a renowned surgeon with a Park Avenue office. Accusing him of treason based on the word of a frightened train passenger is a very big claim." Before Chloe could find the will to argue again, the heavy door clicked open. Jackson Reynolds stepped inside. His green tactical jacket was gone, replaced by a simple black shirt that revealed the toned muscles and faint scars on his arms. Havoc was not with him, probably inside a canine vehicle. Following Jackson was an older man in a charcoal suit, his identification badge showing an extremely high security level. "The woman is telling the truth, Sterling," the man stated flatly. "I need you to stand down." Sterling immediately snapped to attention. "Director, we were simply confirming the events." "That timeline is already confirmed," Jackson interrupted. His cold gray eyes locked on the agent. "I personally removed the drive from a hidden compartment in her titanium leg brace, a space that required specialized tools to create, tools found in Dr. Arias's laboratory. Miss Rollins is a victim who was exploited, not a willing partner. If you charge her or leak her name to the press, you will be answering to the Department of Defense." Jackson's gaze then fell on Chloe, and the icy look in his eyes softened. "Are you holding up okay?" "I want to go home," Chloe whispered, pulling the blanket closer around her. "I just want to go back to Boston." "You will," Jackson promised her gently. Chloe was finally allowed to rest on a small bed in a secure room. At the same time, Jackson's powerful connections set the wheels of justice into rapid motion. At 4:30 that morning, 20 blocks from there, Dr. George Aris was frantically shoving bearer bonds and encrypted hard drives into a leather satchel. His luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park was completely dark. The only illumination came from the mechanical glow of a paper shredder in his study. Aris was sweating, his hands trembling. A text had arrived 30 minutes earlier on a disposable phone. It read, "The train operation failed. The seal was present. Erase everything. Run." He zipped the bag shut, his mind racing with panic. He had been so arrogant, so certain. He had realized years ago that his disabled patients made the perfect, unsuspecting couriers. Security at airports and train stations rarely inspected medical devices with any real scrutiny, fearing lawsuits over discrimination. Ares had been paid a 7-figure amount by a shadow corporation to plant the Aegis drive in Chloe's brace. It was meant to be a simple handoff in Boston. Ares slung the heavy bag over his shoulder and reached for his office door. Before his fingers could touch the handle, the solid oak door burst inward, showering the room with splinters. A steel ram, wielded by an FBI SWAT agent, had blown the door from its hinges. Before Ares could even scream, 3 red laser dots painted his chest. Agents in full tactical gear poured into the office, their boots crunching on the piles of shredded documents. "FBI, show me your hands! Drop the bag!" an agent yelled over the ringing in his ears. Ares released the duffel bag as if it were on fire and fell to his knees. He laced his hands behind his head and began to sob. The celebrated surgeon, a man who played games with his patients' lives, was now just a pathetic wreck on his own expensive rug. From the shadows of the hallway, Agent Sterling entered, taking in the scene. He looked down at the quivering doctor. "Dr. George Aries," Sterling said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are under arrest for treason, espionage, and reckless endangerment of a civilian. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." News of the raid was not made public for another 3 days. When it finally broke, the official story was a complex case of financial fraud. The quantum drive, the gunmen, and the former Navy SEAL with his canine partner would remain state secrets, buried deep within classified government files. And Chloe Rollins's name was never mentioned in any report. 6 months had passed since that terrible day in the tunnel. The oppressive New York summer had given way to a crisp, vibrant Boston autumn. The leaves in the Boston Public Garden were a brilliant mix of orange and red, matching Chloe's thick wool coat. The sound of her crutches, a familiar clack thump, was still with her, but it was different now. It was quicker, with a more confident rhythm. After Dr. Aries's arrest, the government had discreetly compensated Chloe from a special victims fund. She used the money to consult with top engineers at MIT. They built her a completely new set of braces. These were not made from heavy titanium, but from an ultralight 3D printed carbon Kevlar composite. The new braces were a fraction of the weight, greatly reducing the chronic pain in her back. More importantly, these braces were truly her own. Chloe stopped near the Swanboat Pond, leaning on her crutches and breathing out a puff of white mist. She was physically stronger, but the emotional scars from that day remained. She still scanned crowds for men in suits, looking for those with cold eyes and hidden firearms. The knowledge that she was targeted for her disability was a heavy burden to carry. It gets easier, you know. The deep, calm voice came from her right, blending so perfectly with the park's atmosphere that she never heard his approach. Chloe turned, and her breath hitched in her throat. Jackson Reynolds was standing near a park bench. He wore a heavy, dark coat with the collar turned up, his hands buried deep in its pockets. The faint scar on his jaw was visible in the cold air. He looked exactly as he had on the train, quiet, steady, and solid. But it was not Jackson's presence that brought tears to Chloe's eyes. Sitting faithfully at his side, ignoring the birds and passers-by, was 90 pounds of lean muscle and watchful amber eyes. "Havoc," Chloe whispered, a radiant smile spreading across her face. Jackson gave the dog a subtle nod. "Go ahead, boy. Say hello." Havoc did not run. He approached with a dignified grace. The big German shepherd came up to Chloe, sniffed her new lightweight braces, and then did precisely what he had done on the train 6 months before. He pressed his warm, solid body against her leg, let out a deep, contented sigh, and rested his massive chin on her knee. Chloe let one of her crutches fall to the pavement with a clatter and sank her hand into the thick fur behind Havoc's ears. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall as she remembered the comfort of his warmth in the most terrifying moment of her life. "I never thought I would see either of you again," Chloe said, her voice trembling slightly. She looked up at Jackson, who stepped forward to retrieve her crutch. "Agent Sterling said you just disappeared, that you were a ghost." "I was," Jackson answered softly, handing the crutch back to her. "I had to resolve some issues with Simon Miller's employers, to ensure that their shell company was dismantled and that no one would ever come looking for the carrier they lost." Chloe winced at the word, but Jackson met her gaze directly. "You are not a carrier, Chloe. You never were," he said with absolute conviction. "Simon and Aries saw your disability as a weakness they could exploit. Their mistake was not seeing the full picture. They didn't see what I saw." "What did you see?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw a woman in constant pain who still boarded a crowded train every day and refused to give up. I saw a woman who had a gun pointed 3 feet from her face and did not fall apart. I saw a survivor." Jackson smiled, a genuine, rare smile that transformed his stern features. Havoc saw it, too. Dogs like him don't protect the weak, they protect family. He knew you were strong long before I did. Havoc grunted softly, nudging his wet nose into Chloe's palm. Dr. Aries pleaded guilty, Chloe said, feeling an immense weight lift from her shoulders. 25 years in a federal prison. No chance of parole. Good, Jackson nodded. Model. I see you have new equipment, he remarked, nodding toward her legs. MIT Engineering, Chloe said with a proud smile. They are lighter and stronger, with no hidden surprises inside. Only you, Jackson corrected her gently. Continue the fight, Chloe. Do not allow what they did to make you fear the world. The world should fear you. Jackson gave a short whistle. Havoc immediately left Chloe's side and sat by Jackson's leg, looking alert and disciplined. Stay safe, Chloe, Jackson said, beginning to turn away. Jackson, wait, Chloe called out. He paused and looked back. Will I see you again? She asked. Jackson looked at her, then down at the magnificent dog beside him. We are out there, he said. If you ever take a train and the seat next to you is empty, well, now you have someone to call. With a brief, two-fingered wave, Jackson Reynolds and his formidable dog turned and left. They blended into the brilliant autumn landscape of the Boston Park, leaving Chloe feeling taller, stronger, and permanently changed by the man who rescued her. The terrible ordeal on the train had reshaped Chloe's life, changing her from a victim into a survivor. She learned the hard way that real monsters do not hide in shadows. Sometimes they wear lab coats and smile, betraying the very people they promised to help. But she also discovered that real heroes can emerge from unexpected places. The scarred, quiet Navy SEAL and his fierce, highly trained canine were proof that great danger and great compassion can live in the same soul. Jackson and Havoc did more than just save Chloe from physical danger. They shattered her belief that she was weak. From that day on, her steps would not be weighed down by the memory of being exploited. Instead, she would move forward with the quiet power of her own secret, unbreakable will.